The night was silent on the forgotten scrap world. Mountains of broken ships stood like graves under the cold stars. Rusting metal and shattered engines lay in endless piles, waiting for scavengers. Among them moved a lonely human man. His name was Joran. He was a salvager, a man who searched through trash of the galaxy to find something worth selling. Joran knew the dump better than anyone. He had walked these paths of steel for years. Every day he hoped to find a working part, an old machine, or maybe something rare. But tonight, something felt different. The wind carried a strange smell, burned metal and smoke, as if something had crashed not long ago. Joran followed the smell, climbing over broken hulls and twisted wings. He saw smoke rising from a mound of wreckage. It was not old, it was fresh, new, dangerous. His heart beat faster, for new wrecks meant patrols would come soon, and patrols meant trouble. Still, his curiosity was stronger, and he pushed forward. At the center of the crash lay a small escape pod, half buried in the junk. Its surface was scorched, its glass cracked, its lights flickering weakly. Joran stepped closer, brushing off the dust with his gloves. He froze when he heard a faint sound. It was not the sound of metal, it was the sound of breathing, weak and broken. He bent down and looked through the cracked glass. Inside, he saw a girl, maybe 16 years old, with silver skin that glowed faintly in the dark. Her hair was pale blue, tangled and wet with blood. Her chest rose and fell weakly, as if each breath was a battle. She was not human, she was alien, and she was dying. Joran's first thought was to walk away. He had no food to spare, no medical gear, and no friends to call for help. Taking her in would only bring danger. The Empire paid high rewards for alien fugitives, and bounty hunters searched these dumps often. If they found Haum, or with him, his life would be over. But as he turned to leave, he heard her whisper, a single word, broken and soft. Please. Her eyes opened for a moment, glowing faintly like two small stars. Then they closed again, her body going limp. Joran stood frozen. He told himself to walk away. He told himself she was not his problem, but his feet did not move. Instead, his hands reached for the emergency lever of the pod. The glass hissed open, steam rising into the night. The girl's fragile body lay inside, shaking with cold. For the first time in years, Joran felt something stir inside his chest. He had lost his family long ago, and since then his life had been empty. Now, staring at this strange alien child, he felt the old fire return. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was. Her head rested against his shoulder, her skin warm like faint fire under his coat. The scrapyard around him groaned with shifting metal. Lights flickered on the horizon, patrol ships scanning the area. Joran knew he had only minutes before they arrived. He had to make a choice. Leave her here to die, or carry her back to his small workshop and risk everything. The wind howled through the graveyard of ships. The girl gave another weak breath, her fingers curling into his shirt. Joran's jaw tightened. He made his choice. Without another thought, he carried her into the darkness. Behind him, the broken escape pod sparked once more and went silent. High above, the searchlights of hunters cut across the sky. They were looking for something or someone, and soon, they would discover what had fallen into the dump. But by then, Joran and the alien girl would already be gone. The night grew colder as Joran carried the alien girl through the scrapyard. Her weight was light, but the risk on his shoulders felt heavy. Every sound of metal shifting, every flicker of patrol lights made his heart race. He knew he had done something foolish, something that could cost him his life. His small workshop was hidden inside a hollow cargo hull. Rust covered the walls, wires hung like vines, and machines slept in silence. This place was his only home, a place for broken things, just like him. He laid the alien girl gently on a table, her silver skin pale in the dim light. Her chest rose weakly, but at least she was still alive. Joran grabbed a canister of water and an old med kit. He cleaned her wounds, wrapped her arm and wiped the blood from her face. She looked peaceful for a moment, almost human, but then her eyes opened, glowing faint blue. Her gaze was sharp, wild, filled with fear. The girl pushed herself up, her hands shaking. She spoke in a strange tongue, fast and broken. Joran raised his hands, his voice calm. Easy. I won't hurt you. She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. Her breathing slowed, though her body stayed tense. Suddenly, a lamp on the table flickered. The tools rattled, the wires sparked. Joran stepped back, startled. The girl's eyes glowed brighter, her fear rising like a storm. Then, with a cry, the metal chair in the corner bent in half as if crushed by invisible hands. Joran froze, his heart pounding. This was no normal alien child. She carried a power that could tear his world apart. The sparks danced for a moment longer, then faded. The girl collapsed, weak again, her glow dimming like a dying ember. Joran rubbed his face, torn inside. If the patrols found her here, he would be executed for harboring her. If the bounty hunters learned about her powers, she would be taken away. He should hand her over and save himself. But when he looked at her, lying helpless on his table, the thought of betrayal burned in his chest. A sudden knock rattled the metal door. Joran froze, his blood turning cold. He crept to the entrance, silent as a shadow. Outside, muffled voices echoed. "Search this sector. The scanners picked up energy. Maybe the pod survivor is close." It was the patrol. They were already hunting. Joran's eyes darted back to the girl. She was too weak to move, too weak to fight. He grabbed a blanket, wrapped her small frame, and hid her beneath a pile of scrap. Her faint glow was covered by rusted sheets and wires. Then he dimmed the lights and opened the door with a tired smile. 2 armored patrol soldiers stood outside, their helmets glowing red. One raised a scanner, its light sweeping over Joran's chest. "Seen anything unusual tonight?" the soldier asked, his voice harsh. Joran shrugged, his tone casual. "Only smoke and junk, nothing worth taking." The soldier narrowed his eyes, then looked past him into the dark workshop. For a long moment Joran thought they would step inside, but another voice called from the distance. "Sector clear, move on." The patrolman gave Joran one last look, then turned and left, their boots echoing on metal. Joran shut the door quickly, his chest heavy with relief. When he turned back, the pile of scrap shifted. The alien girl crawled out, her blanket slipping, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Her lips trembled, and in broken, shaky words, she spoke for the first time in his language. "Why? Help me?" The question cut deeper than any blade. Joran stared at her, unable to answer, because he did not know why himself. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was something greater, something he was not ready to admit. Above the scrapyard, more ships entered orbit, their engines roaring like thunder. Hunters, no. The patrols, searching with greed in their hearts. The real danger had only begun, and Joran had already chosen his path. He would protect her, no matter the cost. The scrapyard was silent again, but silence in such a place was never safe. Joran sat on his workbench, staring at the alien girl, who now rested on a thin blanket near the furnace. She was weak, her body trembling from exhaustion, yet her glowing eyes followed him with suspicion. Every time he moved, she flinched, as if expecting him to hurt her. Joran sighed, his rough hands rubbing against the grease on his trousers. "I don't know what to do with you, kid," he muttered, though she could not understand. The girl tilted her head, watching his lips move. Her face was young, maybe 16 in human years, but her eyes carried something older, something that spoke of pain, loss, and long journeys. When the first light of the dead sun crept through the cracks of the hull, Joran placed a bowl of warm broth in front of her. The smell made her nose twitch, but she only stared at it with narrowed eyes. He picked up a spoon, took a sip to show it wasn't poison, and then slid it toward her. Slowly, her thin hands reached for the bowl, her fingers shaking as she brought it to her lips. She drank, her throat moving quickly, as if she hadn't eaten in days. For the first time, Joran saw her shoulders relax, even if only for a moment. That night, Joran decided to teach her words. He pointed to himself and said, "Joran." Then he pointed at her, waiting. She blinked, confused, then whispered something in her own language, a sound like silver bells. He shook his head gently, repeating, "Joran." After many tries, she managed to copy his word, soft and clumsy. "Joe. Ren." Her voice was fragile but clear, and Joran felt a strange warmth in his chest. The next day, she pointed at him and repeated, "Joran," then tapped her chest and said, "Lyra." The name floated in the air like music. At last, she had given him her name, but peace never lasted long in the scrapyard. That same evening, as Joran fixed an old generator, the lights flickered violently, the tools on the table rattled, and the furnace roared without warning. He turned to see Lyra standing there, her small hands glowing, her eyes wide with fear. Energy sparked around her fingers like lightning. The air itself seemed to bend, the metal walls groaning under invisible weight. "Stop," Joran said firmly, though his heart raced. Lyra shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, control." The glow grew brighter, spreading across the workshop. Joran rushed forward, grabbing her trembling hands, ignoring the sting of energy against his skin. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are safe here. No one will hurt you." Something in his tone reached her, for the glow slowly faded, leaving only silence and the sound of her heavy breathing. Lyra collapsed into his arms, weak from the outburst. Joran carried her back to the blanket, his mind spinning. She wasn't just an alien girl, she was something more, a weapon, a secret, or maybe a target, and by saving her, he had painted a mark on his own back. Later that night, when she finally slept, Joran stood at the doorway of the workshop, watching the stars beyond the junk hills. In the distance, he saw flashes of light in the sky, small but growing. Ships, too many to be traders, too well armed to be scavengers. They were coming closer, searching, hunting. Joran clenched his fists, his decision weighing heavier than before. If he kept Lyra, he would bring danger to himself and everything he knew. If he left her, she would die alone, hunted like prey. He looked back at the girl, her silver skin glowing faintly under the furnace light, her lips whispering his name even in sleep. Joran. He closed his eyes, his choice already made. He would protect her, not because it was safe, not because it was smart, but because for the first time in years, he had something worth protecting, something more than scrap, more than survival. He had Lyra, and together they would face whatever storm was coming, above the scrapyard, too. Hunters drew closer, their shadows stretching across the stars, and Joran knew that the bond they had just begun to build would soon be tested in fire. The scrapyard town was not a quiet place for long. By the next morning, whispers spread like fire across the metal hills. Patrol ships had been seen circling low, bounty hunters had landed in the eastern sector, and scanners were sweeping every block. Joran kept his head down, but inside, his chest burned with worry. Lyra sat hidden deep in his workshop, her silver skin dimmed beneath old blankets. She asked questions in her broken voice. Why? Many ships? Joran forced a smile, though sweat slid down his back. They are not here for scrap. They are here for you. Her glowing eyes widened, her small hands gripping the blanket tightly. The hunters came first to the markets. They were tall men and women in dark armor, their weapons humming with deadly energy. They showed a hollow screen of a silver-skinned girl to the traders. Seen her? They asked, their voices sharp and cold. The traders shook their heads, afraid, but fear made tongues loose. Soon the rumor reached every ear. An alien fugitive was somewhere in the scrapyard. Joran moved quickly through the crowded alleys, buying food and parts, pretending to be calm. He kept his hood low, his steps steady, but he could feel eyes following him. At one stall, a drunk scavenger leaned close and whispered, "You look nervous, Joran. Hiding something in that rust palace of yours?" Joran forced a laugh, tossing a coin across the table. "Only hiding from debt collectors," he said before walking away. By evening, the bounty hunters spread their search to the outer zones. Joran watched from a distance as they scanned each workshop one by one. His hands shook as he repaired an old generator, pretending nothing was wrong, but his ears never left the sound of armored boots echoing closer. Inside, Lyra paced restlessly. Her powers sparked in her fingertips whenever she grew afraid, bending small pieces of metal without meaning to. Joran grabbed her hands gently, his voice steady. "You must control it, Lyra. If they see this, it is over for both of us." She bit her lip, nodding, though her fear was clear. For the first time, he realized she trusted him enough to try. That night, as the town lights dimmed, Joran went to the scrapyard tavern. He needed information, and information always spilled with drink. Hunters filled the corner tables, their helmets resting on the floor, their eyes sharp even when laughing. Joran sat alone, sipping bitter water, pretending to be another tired scavenger. Then he heard it. One hunter whispered to another. The scans picked up strange energy near the western dump, not far from the old cargo hulls. Joran's stomach turned cold. That was his sector, that was his home. He left quickly, his boots crunching against the rusted paths. Every shadow seemed to follow him, every echo made him turn his head. When he finally reached his workshop, he stopped. The door was slightly open, just a crack. He never left it that way. Joran's hand went to the small blaster on his belt, his heart pounding like a drum. He pushed the door slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside, the room was dark, too quiet. Then a shape moved in the corner, tall, armored, watching. The hunter stepped forward, his visor glowing red. "Well, well, scavenger." The voice was cold and sharp. "Looks like you have been keeping a secret." Before Joran could react, a faint light glowed behind him. Lyra, unable to stay hidden, stood trembling, her silver skin catching the furnace glow. The hunter's visor tilted toward her, a cruel smile in his voice. "Found you." Joran's hand tightened on his blaster. He had hoped for time. He had hoped for safety. But they were gone now. The hunt had begun, and neither he nor Lyra could run forever. The hunter's shadow still haunted Joran's mind. That night, after a desperate struggle, he had managed to drive the intruder away, but only barely. Lyra's powers had flared again, bending metal and shaking the floor, forcing the armored man to retreat. But Joran knew the truth. The hunters would return, and next time, they would come in greater numbers. Inside the workshop, Lyra sat quietly by the furnace, her knees pulled close to her chest, her glowing eyes dimmed with shame. She whispered, Danger. Joran sighed, sitting across from her, his face tired but firm. You are not the danger, Lyra. The hunters are. But if you cannot control yourself, then they will find us faster. She lowered her head, but he saw the spark of determination inside her. The next morning, training began. Joran cleared a space outside the workshop, pushing aside old machines and rusted parts. He drew a circle in the dirt with a metal rod. Stay in the circle, focus, no sparks, no accidents, he instructed. Lyra nodded nervously, her small hands trembling. At first, every emotion made metal around her twitch. Fear bent bolts, anger cracked wires, excitement made tools rise into the air. But Joran stayed calm, his voice steady, teaching her to breathe slowly, to focus only on her heartbeat. Hours passed, the sun shifting across the scrapyard sky. Lyra collapsed from exhaustion more than once. Joran picked her up each time, giving her water, pushing her to try again. When she succeeded even for a few seconds, her smile lit her silver face like a sunrise. For the first time, Joran saw hope, not just fear in her eyes. But training was not only about power. Joran taught her how to move through the scrapyard without drawing eyes. They walked the crowded alleys together, Lyra hidden beneath a dirty cloak. She learned to keep her head down, to stay quiet when soldiers passed. In the market, Joran pointed at things and said their names. Fruit, coin, engine. Lyra repeated, her words broken but improving. Sometimes the traders looked at her oddly, but Joran's glare kept them silent. At night, in the quiet of the workshop, Lyra began to laugh, a small, shy laugh at Joran's clumsy cooking or his stubborn way of fixing machines. It was strange, Joran thought, how quickly the silence of his home had been replaced by her voice. He found himself teaching her more words, telling her stories of stars and old battles, stories he had never shared with anyone, and she listened, her glowing eyes wide, as if she was trying to memorize every sound. But danger never slept in the scrapyard. One evening, as Joran returned from the market, he overheard whispers in the tavern. The bounty price has doubled, a scavenger said. Whoever finds the alien girl first will live like a king, another added. Joran clenched his fists, his eyes scanning the room. Too many ears, too many mouths. The secret would not last much longer. When he returned home, Lyra was waiting by the furnace, her eyes bright. She held up a small piece of metal shaped into a bird, wings spread wide. Gift, she said softly, placing it in his rough hands. Joran stared at it, speechless. It was clumsy but beautiful. Her first act not of fear or power, but of care. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he smiled without forcing it. But the moment of peace shattered as a low rumble shook the sky. Joran rushed outside, his eyes narrowing. Dozens of lights burned above the scrapyard, hunters' ships descending like a storm. The ground shook with the roar of engines, and sirens wailed across the town. Lyra stepped beside him, her small hand gripping his sleeve, her voice trembling but strong. They come, Joran. He looked at her, at the fear and fire in her eyes. She was not just a child and she was becoming something more, something powerful, and together they would have to face the storm that had finally reached them. The scrapyard shook under the roar of engines. Dozens of ships filled the sky, their dark hulls glowing with the red mark of the Empire. Bounty hunters had been bad enough, but this was worse, far worse. The Empire did not send warships for junk, they sent them for blood. Joran pulled Lyra back into the workshop, his hands rough but careful. Her eyes glowed brighter, fear mixing with something else, something heavier. They found me, she whispered, her voice breaking. Joran frowned, his chest tightening. You knew this day would come, he said, his voice low. Lyra nodded slowly, then lowered her head. I did not tell you, Joran. I am not just a girl. Joran stared at her, the words sharp as knives. What are you then? He asked, though part of him already knew. Lyra raised her hands, showing faint scars along her wrists. I was born in the house of Sarath, a bloodline that ruled the Kavari worlds. We were hunted, killed, all of us. I am the last. Her voice trembled, but her glowing eyes held truth. I am the heir to a fallen empire. Joran's breath caught in his throat. An alien princess, hunted across the stars, hiding in his workshop like a broken machine. It sounded like a story told in taverns, not real life. Yet here she was, small, fragile, powerful, and the last of her kind. Outside, the scrapyard filled with soldiers in black armor, their boots striking metal with perfect rhythm. They set up scanners, they questioned the traders, they pulled open doors and tore through homes. One shouted orders, his voice carried through the night. Find the heir, she must not escape again. Joran pressed his back to the wall, his blaster heavy in his grip. They are not just here to kill you, he muttered, his eyes sharp. They want to use you, don't they? Lyra nodded, her lips tight. They will put me on a throne as a puppet, a symbol, a weapon against their enemies. Yeah, and if I refuse, they will burn me alive. Joran cursed under his breath. He had taken her from a scrap pod, thinking she was just a scared child. Now he saw the truth. He had pulled a spark from the ashes of a galactic fire, and the fire was already spreading. Lyra stood, her small frame trembling, but her voice strong. You should leave me, Joran. They will kill you for being with me. He looked at her, his face hard, his jaw tight. I already made my choice when I opened that pod. I don't abandon family. Her eyes softened, and for the first time she smiled through her fear. Suddenly the walls rattled with a heavy knock. Open up, a soldier's voice commanded. Joran grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her toward the hidden hatch beneath the furnace. They slipped into the narrow tunnel that led into the scrapyard's deeper ruins, the sound of armored fists echoing above them. By the time the soldiers broke into the workshop, the room was empty. In the tunnels, Lyra's breath came fast, her hands glowing faintly in the dark. They will never stop, Joran. They will chase us across stars. He tightened his grip on her hand. Then we run faster, and we fight harder. Above, the Empire's commander raised his visor, staring across the scrapyard with cold eyes. Spread out, leave no hull unturned, he ordered. The heir is here, and this time, she will not escape us. As Joran and Lyra crawled deeper into the shadows, the scrapyard groaned under the weight of an Empire's hunger. The secret was no longer hidden. The hunters were no longer the threat. Now the Empire itself had come, and the war for Lyra's survival had truly begun. The tunnels under the scrapyard stretched like veins through rust and darkness. Joran moved quickly, his hand gripping Lyra's as they ducked under pipes and crawled across broken beams. Above them, the boots of Empire soldiers echoed like thunder, heavy and close. The searchlights cut across the cracks in the ceiling, their glow stabbing into the shadows. Joran stopped for a moment, his chest rising and falling with heavy breath. We cannot stay here, Lyra. They will burn the whole yard if they must, he whispered. Lyra's glowing eyes reflected the dim light, filled with both fear and determination. Where can we go? She asked softly, her words still broken but clearer now. Joran hesitated, then pointed west. There is an old cargo ship buried under Sector 9. I worked on it for years. It can fly again, maybe. The word maybe hung in the air like a curse, but there was no other choice. They moved through the tunnels until they reached a grate. Joran pried it open, and they crawled up into the open scrapyard. The air was thick with smoke, searchlights sweeping across mountains of rusted ships. Distant alarms wailed, and the red glow of Empire patrol drones moved across the horizon. Keeping low, they darted between broken hulls, the metal biting cold under their boots. Lyra stumbled once, but Joran caught her, pulling her close. Her small frame trembled, yet she kept moving. She was no longer just a child running. She was fighting her own fear with each step. At last, they reached the edge of Sector 9. There, half buried under layers of old freighters, lay the forgotten cargo ship. Its hull was cracked, its wings bent, but Joran knew its bones were strong. He had spent years salvaging parts from it, dreaming one day of leaving this cursed world. Now that dream might be the only chance they had. Inside, Joran said quickly, pulling Lyra through a gap in the sim. East side, the interior smelled of oil and dust, the floor littered with tools and wires. Joran ran to the control room, brushing dirt off the panels. Come on, old girl, wake up, he muttered, as his hands flew across the switches. The ship groaned, the lights flickered, but the engines remained silent. Outside, voices shouted, Sector 9, check the wrecks, scan everything. Soldiers were coming, their search narrowing. Lyra stepped beside him, her glowing hands brushing the cracked console. "Let me try," she whispered. Before Joran could stop her, sparks of energy flowed from her palms into the dead circuits. The ship trembled. The engines coughed, then roared faintly to life. Panels lit up, systems groaning awake after years of silence. Joran stared at her, half in awe, half in fear. "You could have fried the core," he said sharply. Lyra smiled faintly, her voice soft. "But it worked." Before they could celebrate, the hull shook with heavy blows. Soldiers had reached the wreck, pounding on the metal, cutting their way inside. Joran jumped into the pilot seat, his fingers dancing across the controls. The engines screamed louder, the ship rising slowly, painfully. "Hold together, just a little more," Joran begged the ship. The soldiers burst through the side, blasters raised, their visors glowing red. "Stop them!" one shouted. Energy bolts lit the cabin, sparks raining down as metal burned. Lyra raised her hands, her eyes glowing bright. With a cry, she pushed, and the metal beams collapsed between them and the soldiers, sealing the way. The ship lifted higher, breaking free of its grave. The scrapyard shook with the roar of engines. But above, more warships descended, their shadows covering the stars. Joran gritted his teeth, his hands tight on the controls. "We are not out yet," he growled. Lyra stood beside him, her small hand gripping the back of his chair. "We fight," she said firmly, her voice no longer weak. Joran glanced at her, and for the first time he did not see a scared child. He saw a warrior ready to stand beside him. The ship blasted upward, fire trailing behind. Behind them, the scrapyard erupted in chaos. Ahead, the Empire's blockade closed in like a steel net. The escape had begun, but survival was still far away. The old cargo ship shuddered as it clawed its way into the sky. Engines screamed, metal groaned, and warning lights flashed across the control panel. Joran pulled hard on the controls, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the stars ahead, but those stars were already covered with the black hulls of Empire warships, waiting like wolves. Lyra stood beside him, her glowing eyes wide, her hands gripping the seat, her voice trembled. "They surround us." Joran didn't look at her, his hands steady. "Then we break through," he muttered, his voice sharp with defiance. The comm crackled, a cold voice filling the cabin. "This is Commander Vaynar of the Empire. Surrender the air, and you will live. Resist, and you will burn." Joran's lips curled into a bitter smile. "They always say that," he growled, cutting the comm with a slam of his fist. A squadron of sleek fighters detached from the blockade, engines glowing red. They dived toward the cargo ship like predators, weapons armed. The first volley struck the hull, shaking the ship, sparks raining across the cabin. Lyra cried out, her hands glowing faintly. Joran shouted over the noise, "Shields are dead! Hold on!" The ship rolled hard to the left, scraping past a beam of energy that could have split them in two. Joran's fingers danced across the controls, his eyes sharp. He had flown dozens of patched-up ships before, but never under fire this heavy. "Old girl, don't fail me now," he whispered to the ship as if it could hear. The fighters closed in, weaving like hawks, their blasts hammering the shields. Lyra stumbled, falling against the console, her small hands slamming down on cracked panels. Suddenly, energy rippled through her. "Off the circuits!" The cargo ship groaned, and a faint blue shimmer wrapped around them. A shield, thin but alive. Joran's eyes widened. "Did you—" Lyra's voice broke. "I tried." The next volley struck, and instead of ripping them apart, the blasts cracked against the blue glow. Lyra's body trembled, sweat shining on her silver skin. Her power was feeding the shield, her life force burning into the ship itself. Joran cursed, swinging the ship into a dive, weaving between burning wrecks and floating debris. The scrapyard planet shrank below, the Empire's blockade tightening above. Fighters swarmed, their red engines circling closer. Lyra cried out again, her hands shaking, sparks flickering across her arms. The shield flared bright, then faltered. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, her strength fading. Joran fired the ship's only turret, bolts of green light tearing across the black. One fighter exploded in a bloom of fire, another spun out, smoking, but three more replaced them, their wings flashing with deadly light. The comm crackled again, the same cold voice. "Last warning, surrender, or we tear you apart." Joran's eyes burned with rage, his hands gripping the controls. "You want her? You'll have to crawl into the fire to get her." The fighters launched another wave, beams lancing across the void. The cargo ship shook violently, alarms screaming, panels sparking. Joran fought the controls, but the ship jerked hard as something latched onto them. A tractor beam. pulling them toward the belly of the largest warship. "No," Joran growled, slamming every thruster, every boost, but the ship only groaned and slowed. Lyra pushed herself up weakly, her glowing eyes dim. She whispered, "I can stop it." Joran turned sharply, his voice rough. "No, you'll burn yourself out, you can't." But Lyra's hands glowed brighter, her body shaking as she reached toward the wind. Ow! The tractor beam shimmered, bending, flickering. The warship groaned as if something pushed against its grip. For a heartbeat, Joran thought she might break them free. But then her body gave out, her glow dimming. She collapsed in the cabin, her small frame limp, her breath shallow. The tractor beam surged stronger, pulling them into the darkness of the warship's hangar. The cargo ship crashed onto the steel floor with a deafening thud, alarms still wailing, smoke filling the cabin. Joran crawled to Lyra's side, his hands shaking as he checked her pulse. She was alive, but only barely. Outside, armored soldiers marched, their visors glowing red, weapons raised. The Empire had them trapped, and as the hangar doors sealed shut, Joran realized the real fight was only beginning. The cargo ship lay broken in the Empire's hangar, smoke curling from its engines. Dozens of armored soldiers surrounded it, their weapons glowing, their boots striking steel in perfect rhythm. Joran tightened his grip on the blaster at his side, but he knew there was no point. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. The soldiers dragged open the hatch, their cold voices echoing. "Hands up, scavenger," one barked. Joran raised his arm slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with silent rage. Behind him, Lyra stirred weakly, her glowing eyes half closed, her body trembling with exhaustion. The soldiers froze when they saw her silver skin and faint glow. Whispers spread through their ranks like fire. "It's her, the heir." They did not shoot. They did not even touch her. Instead, they stepped back, lowering their heads slightly. Even hardened soldiers of the Empire felt fear in her presence. One of them activated his comm, his voice sharp. "Inform Commander Vaynar, the heir has been secured." Joran's heart twisted at the word secured. To them, she was not a girl, not even a prisoner. She was property. They seized him quickly, slamming his arms into binders. Lyra tried to rise, her voice faint. "No, don't hurt him." But the soldiers ignored her, draggy. Nudging Joran toward the cells, he was thrown into a dark chamber with metal walls and no windows. Chains rattled as the door slammed shut. Joran pressed his back to the cold steel, his chest rising and falling with heavy breath. The sound of boots echoed outside, fading as they took Lyra away. For the first time, Joran felt truly helpless. His fists clenched, but there was nothing to fight, no scrap to fix, no way to protect her. Meanwhile, Lyra was carried through the warship's long corridors. Her eyes flickered with faint light, her lips whispering Joran's name even as soldiers led her deeper inside. At last, they reached a chamber of black stone and silver light. At the center sat Commander Vaynar, tall, armored, his visor glowing crimson. He leaned forward, his voice calm but heavy as iron. "So, the last Serath lives, the bloodline survives." Lyra stood shakily, refusing to kneel. "You killed my family, you burned my home," she said in a voice filled with fire. Vaynar tilted his head, unbothered. "And yet, you live heir because the Empire has need of you. Your blood carries power, power that can bind worlds." She spat the words like poison. "I will never serve you." The commander chuckled, low and cruel. "You will, or the scavenger dies screaming." Her body trembled, her hands glowing faintly. "You touch him, I burn this ship to ash," she whispered. The chamber grew tense, soldiers shifting uneasily, the air vibrating with her power. But Vaynar only smiled beneath his mask. "Good. The fire is strong in you, but fire can be shaped, controlled, used." Back in his cell, Joran paced like a caged animal. His mind raced through plans, each one collapsing as quickly as it formed. The walls were too thick, the guards too many, the ship too vast. But he could not sit and wait. He had promised himself he would never abandon her. His fists pounded against the steel. "NK Joran, think," he muttered through clenched teeth. Outside, the engines of the warship roared, the hangar gates opening. The ship was leaving orbit, carrying them far from the scrapyard world, far from escape. Lyra stood in chains before the Empire's commander, her glowing eyes burning with defiance. Joran sat alone in darkness, his mind a storm of rage and desperation, and above them both, the shadow of the Empire stretched wider, ready to crush them. The scavenger and the heir were now deep inside the heart of the beast, and if they did not act soon, one would be broken into a weapon, and the other would be broken into silence. The warship drifted through the void like a steel beast. Inside, silence pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating. Joran sat chained in his cell, his wrists burning from the metal cuffs. He had fought pirates, scavenged worlds, and faced hunters, but never had he felt so powerless. Through the thick door, he heard footsteps. A guard entered, his visor dull, his voice low. "You are the scavenger, yes? The one who hides the air." Joran glared up at him, spitting the words like fire. "I don't hide her. I protect her." The guard hesitated, then leaned closer, his tone hushed. "Then protect her now, before the commander breaks her. There are things you don't know." Joran's eyes narrowed, suspicion sharp. "Why are you telling me this?" The guard lifted his visor slightly, revealing scarred skin and tired eyes. "Because I once served her family, before the Empire slaughtered them." For a heartbeat, Joran's rage faltered, replaced by a thin spark of hope. But hope in the Empire's shadow was always dangerous. Meanwhile, Lyra stood in the throne chamber, chains glowing faintly against her silver skin. Commander Vaynar circled her like a predator, his voice calm but heavy. "You will lead worlds back to us, child. With your bloodline, planets will kneel." Lyra's eyes burned, her voice sharp as glass. "I will never serve you." Vaynar leaned closer, his mask reflecting her trembling face. "Then the scavenger dies." The word struck her like a blade. Her body shook, not with fear, but with fury. Her voice cracked. "If you harm him, I will tear this ship apart with my hands." Energy sparked across her skin, the floor trembling, soldiers shifting uneasily. But Vaynar only laughed. "You think yourself strong, but you are young, unshaped, raw. The Empire will carve your fire into obedience." In his cell, Joran's heart pounded as the guard whispered more. "The truth is worse than you think. The Empire does not just want her as a symbol, they want her power." Joran's voice was low, dangerous. "What power?" The guard's face hardened. "She carries the Serath flame, the gift of her bloodline. It can bend energy, destroy fleets, even shatter worlds. With her, they could rule forever." Joran's breath caught, his hands tightening against the chains. He had seen glimpses of that power, the sparks, the shields, the crushing metal. But to hear it spoken aloud filled him with dread. If the Empire controlled Lyra, there would be no escape, no resistance left in the galaxy. The guard leaned closer, his voice urgent. "Tonight, they will force her to kneel before the fleet. They will bind her to the Empire. Once she submits, she will never be free." Joran's teeth clenched, his mind racing. "Then we don't let it happen." The guard nodded once, slipping a small blade into Joran's hands. "Cut your chains when the alarms sound. I will do what I can." Back in the throne chamber, Vaynar raised a hand. Soldiers dragged in a screen, its surface glowing with the live faces of governors and lords across the Empire. He spoke loudly, his voice proud. "Behold, the heir of Serath, the last of her line, soon to swear loyalty to the Empire." Gasps echoed through the screen, some voices in awe, others in fear. Lyra's head lowered, her chains rattling, but then her eyes met Joran's for face in her memory, his voice in her mind. "You are not a weapon. You are more." Her body shook, her hands glowing brighter. The screen flickered as energy surged. Soldiers raised their rifles. Vaynar's hand shot up. "Control her," he barked. But before the command could fall, Lyra shouted, her voice like thunder. "I am not yours." Energy burst across the chamber, lights exploding, walls cracking, soldiers thrown back. The fleet governors cried out on the screen as the image shattered into static. Vaynar's visor burned red through the chaos, his voice a roar. "Then the scavenger dies this night." In the cell, alarms blared, lights flashing red. Joran cut through his chains with the hidden blade, his eyes fierce. The time for waiting was over. The time for truth and fire had begun. The warship shook under Lyra's power. Alarms screamed through the corridors, red lights spinning like blood across the walls. In the throne chamber, shattered glass and broken panels sparked wildly. Soldiers lay unconscious, thrown by the blast of her rage. Commander Vaynar stood tall in the chaos, his armor cracked but his voice calm. "You've shown them your fire, girl," he said coldly. "Now let me show you mine." From his chest, he drew a black blade humming with energy. It was no ordinary weapon. It pulsed with dark power, forged long ago to counter the Serath flame. Lyra stood in the center of the room, her hair glowing with silver light, her skin lit like starlight, her chains shattered on the floor, melted by the force of her awakening. "You cannot control me," she said, her voice no longer a whisper but a roar. "I am not your weapon." At the same moment, deep in the lower decks, Joran ran through smoke-filled halls. His blaster low, his steps silent. Guided by memory and gut, he moved toward the throne chamber. Every corner had guards, but now they were scattered and afraid. The ship itself trembled, as if responding to Lyra's power. He reached a sealed door and placed his hand against the control pad. "Come on," he whispered. A voice Ikitsan howled behind him. "You'll need help." It was the same scarred soldier, the one who had freed him. He tossed Joran a second blaster. "Save her and end this." Inside the throne room, Vaynar struck. His blade cut through the air like a scream. Lyra barely dodged, the edges slicing her arm, sparks flying from her skin. She cried out, but she did not fall. Instead, she lifted both hands, forming a shield of pure energy. "You are powerful," Vaynar growled, "but you are still a child." "No," she said, her eyes burning like suns. "I am Sarath, and I am not alone." The doors burst open and Joran stormed in, blasters blazing. Energy bolts slammed into the commander's armor, pushing him back. Vaynar roared, turning his blade toward the new threat. But Joran didn't stop. He moved fast, dodging swings, drawing the fire away from Lyra. "Now, Lyra," he shouted, "I can't do this without you." She closed her eyes, focused. The room fell silent for a moment, then began to pulse with light. A wind of raw energy circled her, lifting her off the ground. Every broken wire lit up, every cracked panel glowed. Commander Vaynar charged, his blade ready to strike Joran down. But Lyra raised her hands and unleashed everything. A wave of light exploded outward, pure and blinding. Vaynar's blade shattered. His armor cracked, and his body was thrown across the chamber. He crashed into the far wall, smoke rising from his broken armor. He coughed once, and then lay still. The ship groaned deeply, the engines failing, the structure failing. "She's tearing the whole thing apart," Joran muttered, grabbing Lyra. "We have to go now." They ran together, past stunned guards, through broken corridors. The scarred soldier met them near the escape bay. "I've cleared a pod. Take it," he said. "You gave us all a reason to hope again." Joran nodded once, no time for words. He and Lyra climbed into the pod, sealing the hatch as fire spread through the hull. Looked like a dying star, exploding in silence, consumed by the very power it tried to steal. In the escape pod, Lyra rested her head on Joran's shoulder. He held her close, his arm around her. "We did it," she whispered. He looked out at the stars ahead. "No," he said softly. "We started it." Behind them, the Empire had lost its throne. Ahead of them, a future waited. Two fugitives, a scavenger and a lost heir, now free. Together, they would shape a new destiny.